Certain questions, which one frequently hears, are not philosophical queries but psychological confessions. This is particularly true in the field of ethics. It is especially in discussions of ethics that one must check one's premises, or remember them, and more, one must learn to check the premises of one's adversaries. For instance, objectivists will often hear a question such as, what will be done about the poor or the handicapped in a free society? The altruist collectivist premise, implicit in that question, is that men are their brothers' keepers, and that the misfortune of some is a mortgage on others. The questioner is ignoring or evading the basic premises of objectivist ethics and is attempting to switch the discussion onto his own collectivist base. He does not ask, should anything be done, but what will be done, as if the collectivist premise had been tacitly accepted, and all that remains is a discussion of the means to implement it. When Barbara Brandon was asked by a student what will happen to the poor in an objectivist society, she answered, if you want to help them, you will not be stopped. That is the essence of the whole issue and a perfect example of how one refuses to accept an adversary's premises as the basis of discussion. Only individual men have the right to decide when or whether they wish to help others. Society, as an organized political system, has no rights in the matter at all. Since nature does not guarantee automatic security, success, and survival to any human being, it is only the dictatorial presumptuousness and the moral cannibalism of the altruist collectivist code that permits a man to suppose, or idly to daydream, that he can somehow guarantee such security to some men at the expense of others. If a man speculates on what society should do for the poor, he accepts thereby the collectivist premise that men's lives belong to society and that he, as a member of society, has the right to dispose of them, to set their goals, or to plan the distribution of their efforts. Humility and presumptuousness are always two sides of the same premise, and always share the task of filling the space vacated by self-esteem in a collectivized mentality. The man who is willing to serve as the means to the ends of others will necessarily regard others as the means to his ends. The more neurotic he is, or the more conscientious in the practice of altruism, the more he will tend to devise schemes for the good of mankind, or of society, or of the public, or of future generations, or of anything except actual human beings. Hence the appalling recklessness with which men propose, discuss, and accept humanitarian projects which are to be imposed by political means, that is, by force, on an unlimited number of human beings. The hallmark of such mentalities is the advocacy of some grand-scale public goal without regard to context, costs, or means. Out of context, such a goal can usually be shown to be desirable. It has to be public because the costs are not to be earned but to be expropriated. And a dense patch of venomous fog has to shroud the issue of means because the means are to be human lives. Medicare is an example of such a project. Isn't it desirable that the aged should have medical care in times of illness? Its advocates clamor. Considered out of context, the answer would be, yes, it is desirable. Who would have a reason to say no? And it is at this point that the mental processes of a collectivized brain are cut off. The rest is fog. Only the desire remains in his sight. It's the good, isn't it? It's not for myself, it's for others, it's for the public, for a helpless, ailing public. The fog hides such facts as the enslavement and therefore the destruction of medical science, the regimentation and disintegration of all medical practice, and the sacrifice of the professional integrity, the freedom, the careers, the ambitions, the achievements, the happiness, the lives of the very men who are to provide that desirable goal, the doctors. After centuries of civilization, most men, with the exception of criminals, have learned that the above mental attitude is neither practical nor moral in their private lives, and may not be applied to the achievement of their private goals. There would be no controversy about the moral character of some young hoodlum who declared, "Isn't it desirable to have a yacht, to live in a penthouse and to drink champagne, and stubbornly refused to consider the fact that he had robbed a bank and killed 2 guards to achieve that desirable goal. There is no moral difference between these 2 examples. The number of beneficiaries does not change the nature of the action, it merely increases the number of victims. In fact, the private hoodlum has a slight edge of moral superiority. He has no power to devastate an entire nation, and his victims are not legally disarmed. It is men's views of their public or political existence that the collectivized ethics of altruism has protected from the march of civilization and has preserved as a reservoir, a wildlife sanctuary, ruled by the mores of prehistorical savagery. If men have grasped some faint glimmer of respect for individual rights in their private dealings with one another, that glimmer vanishes when they turn to public issues. And what leaps into the political arena is a caveman who can't conceive of any reason why the tribe may not bash in the skull of any individual if it so desires. The distinguishing characteristic of such tribal mentality is the axiomatic, the almost instinctive view of human life as the fodder, fuel, or means for any public project. The examples of such projects are innumerable. Isn't it desirable to clean up the slums, dropping the context of what happens to those in the next income bracket? Isn't it desirable to have beautiful planned cities, all of one harmonious style, dropping the context of whose choice of style is to be forced on the home builders? Isn't it desirable to have an educated public, dropping the context of who will do the educating, what will be taught, and what will happen to dissenters? Progress can come only out of men's surplus, that is, from the work of those men whose ability produces more than their personal consumption requires, those who are intellectually and financially able to venture out in pursuit of the new. Capitalism is the only system where such men are free to function and where progress is accompanied not by forced privations, but by a constant rise in the general level of prosperity, of consumption, and of enjoyment of life. It is only to the frozen unreality inside a collectivized brain that human lives are interchangeable, and only such a brain can contemplate as moral or desirable the sacrifice of generations of living men for the alleged benefits which public science or public industry or public concerts will bring to the unborn. The next time you encounter one of those public-spirited dreamers who tells you rancorously that some very desirable goals cannot be achieved without everybody's participation, tell him that if he cannot obtain everybody's voluntary participation, his goals had jolly well better remain unachieved, and that men's lives are not his to dispose of. And, if you wish, give him the following example of the ideals he advocates. It is medically possible to take the corneas of a man's eyes immediately after his death and transplant them to the eyes of a living man who is blind, thus restoring his sight, in certain types of blindness. Now, according to collectivized ethics, this poses a social problem. Should we wait until a man's death to cut out his eyes when other men need them? Should we regard everybody's eyes as public property and devise a fair method of distribution? Would you advocate cutting out a living man's eye and giving it to a blind man so as to equalize them? No? Then don't struggle any further with questions about public projects in a free society.